What is the most up family secret you've ever discovered? Story 1. My grandparents live in the Middle East. They used to have what was essentially a child servant. An impoverished family sent their 12-year-old daughter to live with my grandparents to work as a maid. She worked day and night, attending to my grandmother. She was being paid for her work, but the money went to her parents for safekeeping until she was older. She didn't go to school and could barely read or write. I never realized how wrong this was until many years later. I was 6 at the time. I am 21 now. I've spoken out against it to my mother and grandparents, but this happened many years ago. I'm now told to keep quiet about it because people will misunderstand. Story 2. One of my cousin's sisters got a young girl to help around the house after having her second baby. The child she got as domestic help was no older than 6. She stayed for around 2 years. During that time, she had to wash clothes by hand, do the dishes, clean the house, and more. On top of that, the 2 kids in the house would constantly beat her and pull her hair. Even my cousin would hit her if she didn't wash the clothes properly. The neighbors, after hearing the girl cry many times, called a social service organization. My cousin and her husband agreed to send the girl to school, but they never did. Social services came again after a few months. More promises were made, but still nothing changed. Eventually, they packed her things and sent her home very early one morning. They never told anyone why. A few months later, I heard her husband say to their kids, "No, you don't want to do that, or else your ears will be damaged like." That's when I realized my cousin had hit the girl so hard that she lost hearing in one ear. And instead of getting her medical help, they decided to just send her back. Truly awful people. Story 3. My uncle was a very high-ranking spiritual leader with the Hare Krishna movement. As a result, he spent over 30 years living in India. He did a lot of charitable work, and even though we held different religious beliefs, I had immense respect for the good he brought to the world. He passed away about 6 or 7 years ago. In his will, he left over $9,000 to one of his favorite underfunded schools in India. My aunt, his sister, was named one of the co-executors of his will. The other executor was one of his disciples. After his death, my aunt forged the signature of the disciple, withdrew the $9,000, and used it to go on vacation with my grandmother and cousin. They stayed in 5-star hotels and went out every night. Meanwhile, the children in India received nothing. I still feel sick thinking about it. Story 4. This is the most disturbing one. A second cousin of mine was a twin, but the second baby was stillborn. Her parents were very open with her about this. However, this woman developed serious psychological issues. One day, while on a bus, she became convinced she saw her twin. She told her entire family they were wrong, that her brother was alive and had been adopted. She kept seeing this person on the bus and eventually started talking to him. They began dating. Yes, she believed she was dating her own dead twin. A few months into the relationship, they broke up. Not long after, she claimed to be pregnant with her twin's child. The pregnancy progressed to the point where she went in to learn the baby's S. I honestly don't know how this wasn't caught earlier. And it was then revealed that the baby was not real. She had experienced a false pregnancy. She believed so strongly that she was pregnant that her body physically acted like it. Pregnant with her deceased twin's baby. My family avoids talking about it to this day. Story 5. Like any family, mine has its issues. But I think the most disturbing thing was how my sister treated me when we were younger. She used to mess with me psychologically. I was about 5 years old and she would suddenly start acting differently, telling me that I wasn't real, that I had died in an accident years ago, that our parents were actually dead, and that I hadn't been able to cope with it, so I just imagined they were still alive. As an incredibly impressionable child, these sessions always drove me to tears. They always happened when my parents were out for most of the night, leaving me alone in the house with her for hours. Once I got older and realized she was just being cruel, she stopped. I don't think there were any lasting effects from it, but I can still remember one time when she just stared at me with cold, unfeeling eyes and told me I wasn't real. I felt sick and started sobbing, and she just kept staring. As I cried, she turned out the light in my room and locked me inside, telling me to think about what she'd told me. Story 6. In the 1980s, my aunt was heavily into drugs. She married a man who was also heavily into drugs, and they had a child together. When their daughter was just 6 months old, he began cheating on my aunt. They got divorced. He later married the woman he had been cheating with. They had 3 kids and were on and off married until the early 2000s. One of their kids was named Luke, and he and I ended up going to school together. We were in the same second grade class, and unsurprisingly, he had severe behavioral issues. My mom, his half-sister's aunt, worked at the school and was the only person who could calm him down. So, my mom was regularly called into our classroom to help settle Luke down and keep him focused. Eventually, the school hired a teacher's assistant to work with Luke so my mom could return to her own job. Fast forward to 4th grade. Luke got suspended for having a joint in his backpack, which his parents apparently thought was hilarious to put there. 5th grade. A few 6th graders were expelled for selling illegal substances on the playground. Around the same time, Luke showed clear signs of being under the influence one day, and 11-year-old me was asked to sit with him in-school suspension because they couldn't reach his parents. My mom, who had moved on to a different school district, couldn't leave work to help. Luke seemed to latch on to the idea that he was connected to someone as quiet and stable as me and my family. In 6th grade, the school purposely placed Luke and me in the same class again in case he had another episode. My teacher was even asked to seat us near each other. We sat in pods of 2 to 4 students, and he was always either in mine or the one next to it. One morning, he came to school under the influence of a hallucinogen. I don't recall the exact activity, but it involved colored pencils. He was convinced we were all driving around in cars powered by colored pencils. Another time, he believed a giant cartoon dinosaur was walking through the school. Toward the end of the year, I saw a student selling him pills. When I reported it, the student pulled me aside and tried to bribe me by offering to do something inappropriate in exchange for my silence. I declined and told the principal, who didn't believe me. About a week before school ended, there was a rumor that Luke had gotten a girl pregnant. According to my cousin, Luke's half-sister, the girl miscarried. Luke was expelled in 7th grade for selling drugs at school and was sent to an alternative school. He was later expelled from the alternative school and placed in juvenile detention in 9th grade. He's 21 now and finally trying to turn his life around. He's currently on parole with a 10-year prison sentence hanging over him if he breaks the rules. Story 7. Not my family, my best friends. I lived with them for a while after leaving home during high school. The mom, Jay, had been an undocumented immigrant who came over with nothing. She worked 2 jobs under the table to send money home to her family. She met the dad, S. They got married. He was happy, she wasn't. Once she got her citizenship, she started working 2 legal jobs to support their son and eventually saved up $50,000 for his college fund. Then S had a midlife crisis and left his family to go to Hollywood to make it as an actor. While there, he spent the $50,000 nest egg and racked up another $30,000 in debt. He begged Jay for forgiveness, and she forgave him because of her faith. He cheated on her a few more times just to add to it. I think he's an awful person, and the mom is something of a saint. My best friend did end up going to college. To end this on a somewhat positive note, Story 8. Mom's side Filipino. One of my aunts used voodoo to get my mom's brother Ben to fall for her. This voodoo involved slipping some of her bodily fluids into his food and drinks. Uncle Ben later had an affair and is now happily remarried. My mom and grandma are the only ones who know that her brother James doesn't share the same father as the others. It would devastate him to find out. Dad's side, Iranian. During the Gulf War between Iraq and Iran, my parents helped smuggle my dad's brother, Amo, out of the country to avoid being drafted. He was first taken to Turkey, then Europe, and eventually to the U.S. He still can't return to Iran legally. My mom had an abortion after giving birth to 3 daughters. My dad was upset because he wanted a son. Both of my parents worked full-time. Mom as a nurse and dad as a physician assistant. We needed a babysitter. In Iranian culture, it's expected that if you leave your kids with a relative, especially a grandma, they'll be taken care of. No questions asked. But all of Dad's family was still in Iran, except for Amo. They assumed my Filipino grandma would help, but she charged for her time. This was a cultural shock for Dad. His pride got in the way, so he quit his job to become a stay-at-home parent. With Mom as the sole provider, she couldn't afford another child. Hence, the abortion. In 1997, my parents agreed to get a legal divorce so Dad could go to Iran, marry a woman, have a son, and then divorce her so my parents could remarry. Both agreed to this plan. But things moved too quickly. Dad found a woman named Nasi, and the wedding ceremony happened fast. Too fast for Mom not to be hurt. She found out about it from his relatives on the day it happened. Nazi had a sister named Razi, who was supposed to marry my uncle Ammo, but he refused. He didn't like the family. Because of the emotional fallout, the legal divorce became a real one. The new arrangement was that Mom would have full custody of us three girls, and Dad would get the house. Although unemployed, Dad allowed Mom and us kids to live in the house if she paid part of the mortgage and some of his expenses. It seems like Dad got the better end of the deal, but to him, children are everything. He believed kids needed both parents. Dad eventually brought Nazi to the U.S. before the end of 1997. I didn't know who she was when she arrived. She was nice, fun, and good at games. I thought she was a refugee. I had no idea what was really going on. At some point, she and Dad began sleeping in the master bedroom, while Mom moved to a different room. As a kid, I never questioned it. Dad and Nazi traveled back and forth to Iran for years, leaving Mom to be a single parent. Once Dad sat each of us girls down and said, "You have to tell Mommy to come back to me. I don't know what else to do. My hands are tied." I was confused. I thought, "Come back?" She never left. "You did." I cried. I was 8 and didn't even know they had divorced. In 1998, my baby half-brother was born. That's when Nazi's behavior started to change. She became emotionally unstable. She didn't know how to care for a baby and grew increasingly unfriendly. Things escalated. Dad was working at a casino and wasn't home when one major incident happened. Nazi was making expensive long-distance calls to Iran. Mom asked her to stop, but she refused. My oldest sister, around 11, got into a tug-of-war over the phone with her. There was yelling and crying. Eventually, Nazi hit my sister with the phone. She collapsed. Nazi went back to the bedroom like nothing happened. We called Dad, and when he came home, he talked to her, maybe even hit her, which my mom and sisters hated. I had to make up with her and give her a hug. I remember hating the mole near her collarbone. These kinds of incidents kept happening, yelling, fights, or worse. Dad kept trying to discipline her, but nothing worked. Why did Nazi agree to all this? She didn't finish high school in Iran. Dad claimed he was a doctor in the U.S. She knew he had a family. Her plan was likely to take everything, break him off from us and our mom. She wanted the house, not love. Dad became paranoid she'd cheat on him. Nazi hoarded and stole things. Our jewelry, clothes, bras, even soap and toilet paper. We had to lock our rooms and carry keys at all times. That was our reality. I resented my little brother, not because he was Nazi's son, but because we were forced to raise him. He was undisciplined and spoiled. Once my sisters and I tattooed his backside with markers and took pictures. Nazi didn't like that. She hated anything that resembled us bonding as siblings. By 2001, my youngest sister was born. Same story. No discipline, dumped on us to babysit. Nazi grew worse. The only tie she had to the country was through the kids. Dad and Nazi kept traveling to Iran. They were planning another trip at the end of September 2001, but 9/11 happened, so they postponed. And another glorious year of dysfunction followed. Family secrets don't go away. They stay with you in your own home. At some point, Dad divorced Nazi. There was another agreement. He would get custody of each child at age 11, and she could live in the house. My youngest sister turned 11 this past March. Dad is now seeing lawyers. I'm in school and my sisters have graduated. Dad deeply regrets everything, but whether I forgive him remains uncertain. He's trying to make amends, but it's not enough. Nazi still lives in the home I grew up in. I didn't have friends growing up. Sure, classmates liked me, but I had no one close. I couldn't go to their houses or invite them to mine. How do you explain, "That's my dad's wife, and that's my mom, his ex"? I didn't even fully understand it myself. Dad made it clear. We weren't allowed to talk about Nazi or the situation, and we lived in a street full of old people. No kids, just isolation. But there is good in all of this. My bond with my sisters and mom is unbreakable. I have 2 younger siblings whom I love deeply. We've endured all of this. For them. Story 9. My dad's side of the family is absolutely insane. They're all from Poland, and I've never met any of them. The grandfather, head of the family, had a wooden leg and used to smuggle money into Poland when it was still under communist rule and severely impoverished. The government found out and publicly executed him in a town square. He had hidden the cash inside his wooden leg. He had money because he was living in the US and owned a farm. He would return to Poland, find young men, and convince them he'd pay their way to America. They would give him everything they had, come to his farm, and work for him to pay off the debt. Basically a form of indentured servitude. But instead of letting them go when the debt was repaid, he would murder them using a cane with a brass knob, bludgeoning them unexpectedly. Then he'd have my father and uncle dig graves and bury the bodies. After that, he'd go back to Poland and repeat the process. I don't know whatever became of it, but this all happened in the 1940s. Story 10. My uncle and his wife were involved in drugs, coca, prescription meds, and sold them to others who in turn sold them to their own children. It began with my uncle's daughter stealing painkillers and cigarettes from her mother when she was about 11 or 12. Now, both my uncle and his wife have passed away due to drug use, but their daughter is still dealing and allowing her high school-age kids to use. My great-aunt used to inhale gasoline regularly in an attempt to terminate her fourth pregnancy. It worked in a way. The baby was stillborn. Her husband had wanted the child. One of my cousins was a reckless drug dealer who ran his operation out of his child's bedroom and often left his 2-year-old son unsupervised. He never wanted the child. Family members would regularly find the dad passed out from drinking or in bed with strangers, while the toddler played in the in-ground pool or wandered outside alone. Eventually, he left the country with a woman he met in the military. She cheated on him, and he later died by suicide. They returned his casket to the U.S. for the funeral. The little boy gave the eulogy, wholeheartedly believing fabricated stories about his father being a hero. He still believes them to this day. I was raised with a half-sibling, my dad's child, who might also be my cousin, since my father and his brother were both romantically involved with the same woman. At the time, my uncle was married to her. He later divorced her, married another woman, and had 8 children with her. They became extremely religious and started a church. My dad also has a confirmed daughter from a previous relationship, but abandoned her and the mother because she was a nurse, and he believes she faked the paternity test. That claim is false. I have the documents. Last I heard, they moved, and he never paid child support. Not really a secret unless you count this. My cousins adopted several children, and our grandmother, as well as the kids' other grandmother, refuses to buy them gifts or acknowledge them as grandchildren. The kids no longer visit during the holidays. Story 11. Thanks, OP, for finally showing me a family as dysfunctional as mine. I've never related to anyone in real life before this. My grandfather was a predator who harmed my siblings. He died when I was young. My father was abusive and stole $350,000 from our family before disappearing with another woman. As of last week, he's trying to overturn a permanent restraining order I have against him. He's a convicted felon for stealing that money. My mom raised 3 kids alone and still managed to send us all to private schools. She's a hero, and that makes the rest even more heartbreaking. My father left the family because of me. I was the unexpected child who pushed him over the edge. He didn't want 3 kids. 2 of my uncles were longtime addicts and now have Parkinson's disease. My maternal grandmother actually encouraged them to use drugs back in the 70s, and she verbally abused my mom for refusing to participate. One of those uncles stole the identity of the only upstanding uncle in our family and nearly ruined him financially. My surviving grandmother is a cruel woman who not only mistreated my mom growing up, but has also manipulated my siblings against her. And it worked. My mom is now estranged from my brother and sister. I'm the only one still in contact with her. It's painful. Just recently, she had a breakdown and screamed that 30 years of sacrificing everything for her children has amounted to nothing. That was hard to hear. She also has ovarian cancer, which she only told me about months after being diagnosed. There's more I could say, but only if I were drinking. There are things I just can't bring myself to type. Edit. Not sure why I'm being downvoted. Is it because I didn't post enough disturbing details? Fine. Here's one. I can't remember anything before the age of 9, and none of my therapists have been able to help recover those memories. I'm assuming it's because of the years of abuse from my father, who is a registered offender. I've been told what happened to me, but I'm sure there are things my family will never reveal. My first therapist once told my mom that my father was the most convincing liar she had ever seen after hearing him testify in court. That terrifies me because I inherited that same ability. I can lie convincingly and create believable stories without hesitation. It's not something I'm proud of. One of my cousins was killed in a gang-related incident. His house was raided by a SWAT team. Another cousin has a rare and painful skin condition that could be fatal. One of my aunts had a baby born with a similarly rare disorder that threatens her life. Story 12. My dad recently told me a story about my uncle and his wife. They met in their early 20s and all their children look a lot like him. But my dad shared something I hadn't known. Before marrying my uncle, his wife had dated one of our cousins, who was a minor at the time, while she was in her 20s. Back then, the whole family would gather at my grandparents' house. My uncle and his wife were living there too when they first got married. One day, my grandma was doing laundry and heard something in the basement. She went down and saw her new daughter-in-law in bed with the teenage cousin. My uncle never found out. Some in the family suspect that cousin might be the biological father of her first child, but it's hard to prove since they all look alike. That cousin has a tragic story. He died in a car crash after drinking at a party, just 2 weeks after turning 22. The car rolled and both he and his friend died instantly. Please don't let your friends drive drunk. His mother, my aunt, is a nurse and teaches at a trade school. A former student of hers told us she now tells people her son was a paramedic who died in the line of duty. She says he was killed by a drunk driver while on the job. It's heartbreaking. I believe she truly needed that story to cope. After his death, she sank into a 3-year depression that deeply affected her other kids. One of her sons is now in jail. Her other 2 children also struggle. My cousin was genuinely trying to turn his life around before he died. A few months after his death, his father passed away too. He had diabetes and couldn't take the stress. That same winter, our grandfather also died. At least he lived a long life. Story 13. Dad had a secret marriage before he met my mother. 2 kids with this woman whom I recently met. One is a moderately successful middle manager. The other is a former hero addict now doing cash labor for sketchy people. Dad eventually had an affair with my mom and didn't invite me or my little brother to the wedding. He's an abusive alcoholic who somehow managed to keep a high-paying, white-collar, top-level management job until he retired early-ish at 60. My great-uncle was a teacher who was rumored to be involved with a student. That escalated into an incident at his home with some male students. I don't know the details, but eventually he admitted himself to a psychiatric hospital. One day he walked out, he was there voluntarily, and broke into someone's house on his way home. He ended his life in their kitchen. The homeowners returned to find a stranger lying dead on their floor. I used to make good money selling coke to street dealers. I got caught, but fortunately avoided a prison sentence. My brother is an extremely violent person. My grandmother had a reputation back in the day. To this day, my mom and her sister suspect they may not be full siblings. My grandmother herself was put up for adoption for being born out of wedlock, so I guess the cycle continued. My maternal grandfather was a member of the SES. Before he died, he confessed horrible things to me. He was paranoid about being found out and prosecuted until the day he passed. He was not at peace. My dad's brother used to be a football hooligan when he was younger. Story 14. I have a few. My family is obsessed with saving face. My grandma isn't dead. She's just completely unstable and violent. So my mom told us she was dead so we wouldn't have to deal with her. I had a little brother who died at birth. My parents never told me about him. I found his birth and death certificates while helping my mom sort through legal documents. That one hit hard. He would have been 2 years younger than me. On a related note, I have an uncle who died of SIDS and had the same name as my father. That's right, my dad is a replacement baby. I found a photo labeled Douglas 1963 when my dad was supposedly born in 65. My grandma wouldn't talk about it, but the maid confirmed it. Lesson: maids know everything. My dad's oldest brother was married for 6 months before he married my aunt. His first wife left and stole all the hand towels. That's it. Nothing else, thanks to a prenup. That same uncle dropped out of Harvard Business School after a week, despite scoring an 800 on the math SAT. He now runs a billion-dollar company inherited from my grandfather. If my dad hadn't married my mom, he would have been the CEO instead. I was supposed to be a boy. When I was born a girl, my dad drank himself into a blackout. I was aggressive as a kid, and my dad, without telling my mom, had me tested to make sure I had 2 X chromosomes. I do. I was so cute as a baby that my grandfather disowned my father. My mom was engaged before meeting my dad. They broke up when he joined the Navy. They're still friends, and now that my parents have separated, he might become my stepdad. My parents only had my sister because they were trying for another boy after my brother died. Similarly, if I had been a boy, they wouldn't have tried again. After 9 miscarriages, my mom got tired and adopted my youngest brother. My grandparents are first cousins, and several other family members married first or second cousins too. My parents have been planning their divorce for 19 years. I'm 18. They were waiting for their son to graduate high school. I probably didn't get into college on merit alone. My family has a recognizable name in business. Some parts of my application were even sent on family letterhead. I applied 4 months after the deadline. I still wonder if I deserve to be here. My unstable grandma was 19 when she had my mom. My grandpa was 32. She abandoned them and only came back when she wanted to hurt them. She dated a young lawyer for a while who later became the state's attorney general. I met him through a school club. He looked at me once and visibly panicked, then pulled me aside and asked if I was related to her. My grandfather joined the Army at 16 to escape poverty in Pittsburgh. He looked older and had a fake diploma, so he was sent to post-World War II Germany. As a result, I have multiple European aunts and uncles. I could go on forever. My family is strange. Story 15. I used to see my mother around town, asking strangers for money. She was homeless and had been addicted to drugs since she was 16. She overdosed a few years ago, and I felt relief. I'm glad she never got the chance to be around my children. My father got sober when they were divorced. I was 4 at the time. But in the last 10 years, he started smoking pot again and even did some meth. My 16-year-old brother found his meth and tried it. He's more into taking our parents' pain pills now. My dad and stepmom take prescription painkillers, muscle relaxers, and anti-anxiety meds like clockwork 3 times a day. Once I hurt my back and couldn't get to a chiropractor, so they gave me one of their daily doses. I was so high I couldn't function. I've never let them drive my kids anywhere since. When my uncle was in the Navy, he was stripped naked, hung upside down, and assaulted by a group of men. He recently had a stroke, and no one in the family has checked in on him or tried to find out what's happened to him. Story 16. My father was a relentlessly self-improving boulangerie owner from Belgium with mild narcolepsy and a strange sense of humor. My mother was a 15-year-old French woman named Chloe with webbed feet. My father had a history of womanizing, drinking, and making bizarre claims, like that he invented the question mark. Sometimes he would accuse chestnuts of laziness, expressing a kind of existential discontent that only geniuses and the mentally unstable possess. My childhood was pretty standard. Summers in Rangoon, luge lessons. In spring, we made meat helmets. When I misbehaved, I was placed in a burlap sack and lightly beaten with reeds. Again, fairly standard. At age 12, I received my first scribe. By age 14, a Zoroastrian named Vilma shaved my body hair in a ritual. There really is nothing like a smooth finish. It's breathtaking. Highly recommended. Story 17. My mom and aunt were both abused by their uncle, my great-uncle, from the time they were 5 until they were 13. When my mom finally told my grandmother, it was covered up to protect the family's image. Later, we found out the same man had been living with my grandmother just before she died. My aunt also had ongoing contact with him. My mom's other uncle knew a hitman, had mafia connections, and once killed a man in a foreign bar. Another relative, I think an uncle, was a member of the KKK. One of our great-great-grandmothers was black. My mom's parents divorced when she was 5. My grandmother lied and said her dad would kidnap them, so she kept them away from him. My grandmother may have been a lesbian. My mom found out by accident several relatives, mostly men, were known for abusing their wives or kids. There are many alcoholics and addicts on that side too. In my immediate family, my brother has stolen our car, been charged with DUI and got off, joined the Marines, ran away, and was picked up by police a week later. Now he might go to jail for having a pound of weed in his apartment. He used to threaten me, steal from me, once took my laptop and threatened to destroy it, and punched a hole in our guest house wall. It's still there. That house is now just used for storage. He has serious anger issues. I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot, but that's the bulk of it. Everyone on my mom's side is gone now, so at least we don't have to deal with them anymore. Story 18. I grew up in South Africa in a very conservative, middle-class white family in the suburbs. At the age of 11, my dad died. A few days later, a black woman called our house and said she was pregnant with his child. She asked if we would give her money since he had passed, and she couldn't afford doctor appointments. I hung up in shock and told my mother, who admitted she had spoken to the woman before, but had threatened to call the police if she ever contacted us again. 13 years later, I still hadn't forgotten about her. In 2010, I decided to return to South Africa. I had emigrated to England in my early teens to find an old friend of my dad's, hoping he could help me resolve the lingering questions. Whether my dad had another family or at least a mistress, he revealed that my dad had 4 children by 3 different women. He even knew where one of them lived and took me to meet her, along with my new half-brother and sister. I haven't told my family about any of this, nor do they know that I send money every month to my other family to help with school fees and food, since they are really struggling. It feels bizarre, but also feels right. Story 19. My dad was a ranger in Vietnam, and all in all, the scariest human being I have ever met. I could go on about him all day. One thing I will mention is that when I submitted a FOIA request for his military service, the response I got came from the CIA, which only raised more questions about what he actually did overseas in his youth. That's the backstory, so you'll understand how unsettling the next part is. Years ago, my sister was graduating high school and looking for someone to take her senior photos. She found a guy who seemed reputable and offered great prices. She had the photos taken and then waited for a call, and waited. Eventually, the guy stopped making excuses and just stopped answering calls. My parents called the police and were told, yeah, this is the 5th report we've had about this guy. Looks like a scam. We're trying to find him, but it won't be easy. That was on a Thursday. My dad went downstairs, grabbed his .45, and walked out the door without saying a word. He came back Sunday morning with my sister's money in the pictures. No one has ever asked what happened during those days. The best case scenario is that he found the guy and held him at gunpoint. Story 20. Not really family secrets, but here goes. My biological father is a former addict. I don't remember any of the horrible things he did. He says he loves me. I don't love him, but I accept him. My stepfather raised me and my brother as his own since I was around 3 or 4. I was definitely a daddy's girl. My mom helped him build his wealth. She was with him before he had money. Then he cheated on her with a married woman and later married that woman. My mom has full custody of my younger brother, but my stepdad is now fighting for full custody. He legally adopted me when I was 9, but in court papers, he listed me and my older brother as her children only. I guess I'm no longer considered his. I know he's a pathological liar. One of his many lies was that he loved me. My mother is unstable. Her only redeeming quality is that she truly loves us children. She lost all her money through bad investments. My brother has serious anger issues. He's charming to everyone else, but with his immediate family, he's mean and cruel. I'm 18, about to turn 19, and I have no idea where I'm going with my life. I can't afford school, even with FAFSA, and I've been searching for a job with no luck. I'm slowly losing faith in myself. I'm also an atheist, which is a big deal in my extremely religious family. There are other family members who are equally troubled. Somehow we're still surviving. Story 21. For 7 years, our family dog would relieve itself in one room of the house while me and my sisters were growing up, and it was rarely cleaned. My parents ignored the issue for years, so as a kid, I didn't feel the need to clean it either. This went on through middle and high school before I realized how bad it was. The same dog has bitten at least 9 neighborhood kids and tries to attack any visitor. It has also bitten me, my sisters, and my dad. Yet my mom still lets it sleep in her bed while my dad sleeps alone on the couch. I can't bring a girl over to the house because my parents spent $10,000 on surgery for this 13-year-old dog, so he's still alive. People always ask why they can't come over, and I'm deeply ashamed to tell them the truth. Story 22. My father killed his mother with a pair of scissors. It's not something that's ever discussed, and I have no contact with him for this and many other reasons. My grandfather molested several people, including his own children. That is also not discussed. My aunt taught her children that being a S-worker was the best decision she ever made and encouraged them to follow in her footsteps for the money. She started telling them this when they were 10. She also told them to have children before they turned 20 because, according to her, they would end up with cancer and not be able to have children after their early 20s, just like she did. That same aunt later stole her daughter's boyfriend, and now they live together. She also stole cannabis plants from a local biker gang. When they confronted her and demanded to know where the plants were, she refused to tell them, even when they had her daughter's hand and were cutting off her fingers. It was the daughter who eventually told them where the plants were. Story 23. My grandparents on my mom's side were very affluent Californians. My grandfather was a judge who eventually became the highest-ranking judge in California. In the 1960s, when this side of my family held significant political power in both California and even national circles, they became close friends with an up-and-coming California figure, Jim Jones. Many of the people my mother went to school with ended up joining Jim Jones' cult, and she vividly remembers him coming to their house for dinner on more than one occasion. She would have been a teenager at the time. One day, Jones approached my grandfather and confided that he was having some tax trouble with the state of California. He asked if my grandfather could help him, and 1,000 of his friends leave for Guyana. My grandfather, being generous and wanting to help a friend in need, used his influence to help Jim Jones make that happen. Several months later, Jim Jones and 918 others, including many of my mother's close personal friends, died in Jonestown. Story 24. My dad has never gotten along very well with his family. There are a number of reasons for this. He has always worked hard and built his own business. His family, on the other hand, has a history of manipulating social welfare and shady behavior. When my grandfather died a few years ago, everyone agreed to chip in a fifth to cover the funeral costs. However, it turned out that his family had already taken all of my grandfather's money from the bank and used his life insurance payout to pay for the funeral. They scammed my dad out of $2,000 plus whatever else he should have received. What's worse is that my grandfather had been abused as a child and had received compensation for it. My dad had no idea this money even existed because his siblings never told him. They kept it secret so they wouldn't have to share. All of this came to light during a conversation my dad had with one of his uncles. Turns out it was his own brothers and sisters who had been lying to him all along. After some investigation and confronting, we're now fairly certain my dad wasn't even my grandfather's biological son. To top it off, there's a good chance his real father was one of the country's most notorious criminals, who's been dead for several years now. As for my mom's side, her father was a genius, a brilliant electrical engineer who worked on several well-known landmarks. He also accumulated significant wealth. But he was an abusive alcoholic and reportedly built bombs for the IRA. IRA involvement wasn't unusual at the time, especially since they lived in County Louth. My grandmother eventually took her 2 kids and left him. It was a brave move, and she never spoke to him again. Years later, he tried to contact my mother to make amends. Turns out he had remarried, but never divorced my grandmother. Also, my grandmother had a child out of wedlock whom she gave up for adoption. We didn't find out about this half-aunt until she was in her 30s. Story 25. Registered a new account just to join in on this one. My maternal grandfather is not my biological grandfather. He married my grandmother shortly before I was born. My biological maternal grandfather was an Irish immigrant, a heavy drinker, petty thief, child abuser, and suffered from hallucinations. He just disappeared when my mom was a teenager. My maternal grandmother went through a drug-heavy phase in the 1970s where she neglected my mom and uncle. She would leave them alone for days with no food or supervision. I have an aunt on my mom's side whom I've never met. She was a year or 2 older than my mom. She got pregnant young, may or may not have had an abortion, and may or may not have killed the baby's father. She disappeared when my mom was a teen, shortly after the baby's father died under suspicious circumstances. This same aunt was also extremely abusive to my mom and uncle. My mom has only talked about her once, while very drunk and emotionally overwhelmed due to my grandmother's Alzheimer's. That one time she told me how cruel her sister was. I'd actually forgotten about it until writing this now. I sometimes wonder if my mom may have done something to stop the abuse. There were suspicious parts of her story. I've never brought it up again, and I don't think she remembers telling me. My mom and dad weren't actually together when I was conceived. She was dating his roommate and cheated with my dad. They decided to get married for the kid once they found out she was pregnant with me. When I was 6 months old, my dad tried to abandon us. He planned to ride a motorcycle to California and live there as a drifter. He changed his mind at the last minute after someone, not sure who, confronted him. My dad, his brothers, and their friends were all drug addicts. My dad used coca and smoked crack in the 80s. He still uses coke and drinks heavily. My mom's best friend's son is actually my biological cousin. But he was raised not knowing this. My mom's best friend married a man but had a child with my uncle. One of my uncles is a violent man who abused multiple wives. One of them died under suspicious circumstances. Most of us believe he was responsible. Because of my dad's drug use and bad associations, we moved constantly, over 20 times by the time I left home. I used to think everyone did that. I thought people just moved to get better rent deals or new scenery. But in reality, it was us getting evicted or fleeing from bad situations. We were homeless for a while and lived illegally in a building my uncle was squatting in. I was told we were just staying with uncle while we looked for a place and that it was a cool city loft. One of my uncles has had multiple heart attacks due to crack use. My dad cheated on my mom many times. The first time I realized something was wrong in our family was when I overheard him confess everything while drunk. I was about 10 years old. The strange thing is, aside from that moment, I didn't realize how chaotic and messed up everything was until I reached my late teens. I thought we were a normal nuclear family, just like on TV. Dad worked, mom stayed home, and we were taught that drugs were bad, that family was everything. I thought the scary people around us, my dad's mood swings, the constant moves, were just normal. It was all I knew. Story 26. My maternal great-grandfather was an orphan and a staunch communist who traveled to Cuba and met Fidel Castro. Castro invited him to stay and teach in Cuba, but my great-grandmother advised him not to. Later, he searched for records about his biological father and discovered that he had been an extreme anarchist. My maternal great-grandmother is deeply religious. When her husband, the same great-grandfather, had cancer, she prayed for his pain to end and for his soul to rest in peace. In return, she vowed to never eat on Mondays. She has kept that promise for over 20 years. My maternal grandmother had a long-term affair with a coworker. When my grandfather found out, he attempted to take his own life using a cable cord. My mother walked in, stopped him, and had him hospitalized. Today, my grandmother lives with the man she had the affair with, and they are very much in love. Everyone in the family has accepted it. On my father's side, things are more chaotic. When we moved in with his family, they kicked my mother and my brothers out for no apparent reason. My paternal grandmother would constantly talk about how she believed the government was burning down homes and small businesses to claim the land. My mom had me when she was about 16. My father disappeared until I was about 3. They reunited, had another child, got married, and later divorced. I haven't seen my father in about 10 years. He disappears from everyone, even his own parents. My mom later remarried. She suspected her husband of cheating, he was, so she had an affair herself. She became pregnant from that one encounter. When her husband later found out the child wasn't his, they divorced and he moved in with his lover. Story 27. All right, mine isn't as extreme as some others, but here it is. When I was around 10, I had a pet hamster named Charlie, which was ironic because Charlie was a girl. I lived with my mom and grandparents, who at the time had 2 Cocker Spaniels named Heidi and Bo. One day, my grandma decided to clean Charlie's cage. Instead of putting her in her hamster ball where she could safely run around, she just let her wander on the kitchen table while she did the cleaning. I came home later that day to find what looked like Charlie in the cage, but something felt off. This new hamster bit me the moment I tried to play with it. If you don't handle rodents regularly, they can become aggressive. This hamster was nothing like my Charlie. Years later, while I was in high school, my cousin let it slip. Apparently, while my grandma was cleaning the cage, Bo, being the kind of dog who eats anything, jumped up to the table and swallowed Charlie whole. My grandma told my mom, and in a panic, they rushed to the pet store and replaced Charlie with a look-alike. To make it worse, after the new hamster bit me, they scolded me for not playing with Charlie enough. Honestly, that still messes with me. Story 28. I'm probably late to this thread, but here's my story. My mom and dad separated when I was about 4. The divorce was rough, and by the time I reached high school, I had stopped visiting my dad, even though he lived less than 5 minutes away. After about a year, he stopped trying to reach out to me or my brothers. The summer before my senior year, I saw a Facebook post from my childhood friend, someone who had lived next door to my dad when I was young. The post said, "R.I.P. Brian." I didn't tell anyone about it for 2 days until my football coach asked what was wrong. Eventually, I found out that my dad had been growing marijuana in the house. A fire broke out, and he was badly burned while trying to put it out himself. He survived the fire. 2 weeks later, he died by suicide. He started his car in the garage and let it fill with exhaust. That happened just under 2 years ago, and I've still never told anyone. Story 29. I've never told anyone this, but here it goes. I have 2 stepsisters and 3 stepbrothers. One of the boys is the son of my dad's wife, but not biologically related to my dad. Around Christmas, I stayed at my dad's house for a week or 2. During that visit, my 2 stepsisters confided in me that their brother used to assault them when they were younger. Whenever their parents weren't home, he would force them into horrifying situations. They've never told anyone else, and neither have I, until now. Even more disturbing, they all still live together under the same roof and appear to get along like nothing happened. Also, my dad was once accused of assaulting my youngest stepsister, but the charge was later dropped. The reason for that is still unknown. I have more stories, but I think these already speak volumes. Story 30. My grandfather silly abused my mother and her 3 sisters, possibly others, but I don't know for sure. My grandmother called them liars and did nothing to protect them. Recently, I found out that he had another family. One of his grandsons from that side of the family even ran for state senator. My mom only met her half-sister from that side once, nearly 50 years ago. He got my grandmother pregnant with her first child when she was just 12. He was 21 at the time. He was violently abusive throughout their relationship and began targeting his daughters once they reached their preteen years. He once beat my mother so severely that she lost control of her bladder. Then he forced her to lie face down in it for hours as punishment. There's uncertainty about whether my mother was biologically his. She was told that her parents divorced for a year, during which she was conceived by another man. Then they reconciled and had my uncle. It's all murky and disturbing. He also burned down their family home for the insurance payout. Before the fire, all items of sentimental value were removed, except for photos of my mother as a child. She now has no pictures from her childhood. Many in the family suspect he may have killed at least one person. I only recently learned all of this. I used to think of him as my kind, quiet grandpa. Learning the truth was jarring, but now I finally understand why I was never allowed to stay overnight at my grandparents' house. Story 31. I'm autistic. Some might label it Asperger's, though my psychologist disagrees. And I used to experience epilepsy, hypersensitivity, and synesthesia. Both my mother and brother have physically attacked me during, or perhaps even triggered, epileptic seizures. We lived in a stilt house over mud, a stilt house being a home elevated on stilts. One time under the house, I was unable to feed our dog because he kept barking at me. As punishment, my mother tied me to a pole, like the dog, so I was forced to stay there while he barked at me. I didn't know what she would do if I tried to escape. I was about 12 at the time and had been learning calculus from first principles using a textbook. I spent the evening and early night exploring those concepts. I began screaming when bugs started crawling out of the cracks in the dry mud and disrupted my focus. Eventually, she brought me back inside. I still tell her I love her. That too is a lie. Dishonesty makes me feel physically uneasy, so I avoid lying as much as possible. But this one lie, I say it every time she calls, comes naturally. It's become so practiced that it no longer feels wrong. Until I went to university, I didn't do even the most ordinary things without asking permission. And yet, this one lie, something so emotionally significant to me, has always been effortless. I ended up, unsurprisingly, majoring in math. I don't harbor resentment toward my brother or mother. Just as one does not blame a broken instrument for the sound it produces, I do not waste emotional energy on those I consider incapable of better. That said, I wouldn't hesitate to act against them if doing so brought me meaningful benefit. I would just calculate it carefully and hope for a sense of closure or perhaps finality. Story 32. This will probably be buried, but it's still pretty messed up and honestly kind of incredible. My great-grandfather was famous for being a pioneer publisher of restricted literature in America. He was genuinely impressive. Later, my grandfather got arrested by federal agents for distributing adult content when it was still illegal. As a result, he was banned from the United States. When I was around 1 year old, my family fled to Canada, where my dad eventually got caught by Canadian immigration. We lived there for 5 years. To this day, my grandfather is still not allowed back into the U.S. On the other side of my family, things were a disaster. We moved back to the States to care for my ailing grandparents, even though 90% of their children lived within 30 minutes of them. We gave them the best care for the longest time. Eventually, my grandmother passed away, and a few years later, my grandfather moved out of his large home and into an assisted living facility. When we planned to move to Florida, we invited him to join us. We told him that if he helped cover the cost of a slightly larger house, we would set him up in a spacious in-law suite and continue to take care of him. He agreed, but then my uncle convinced the rest of the siblings that my mother was trying to isolate him and manipulate the will. They forbade him from moving with us and instead sent him to Las Vegas under that uncle's care. Once there, the uncle placed him in a poorly run nursing home and left him there to be neglected. He passed away alone. We then discovered that this same uncle had gotten him to change the will, leaving everything to himself. My parents had to take on the full financial and legal burden of suing him to claim the shares owed to all the siblings. And after the lawsuit, the siblings took their portions and didn't even thank my parents. We cut all ties with them after that. And if all that wasn't enough, while going through my grandfather's paperwork, my mom found an adoption information sheet. Turns out there was one more adopted child in the family. It was my mom. Everyone else had known her entire life, and no one ever told her. Story 33. Since I have no interest in creating a throwaway account, here it goes. I was essentially raised as if my cousins were my brothers. Not literally, but I spent my entire childhood around them. They loved to torment me. They would chase me into corners and scream at me or insult me until I snapped. More than once, they locked me in a cage. My dad physically abused me. He fought for custody of me just to spite my mom, but when I was at his house, he'd tell me to stay in another part of the house and avoid him. One time, he locked me in a horse trailer with his attorney in the middle of the summer. They were drunk and thought it was hilarious. Every time he saw me or my cousins with a girl, he would make a point to flirt with her as much as possible, going back to when I was in 8th grade. He once got mad at me and convinced my entire family that I was a drug addict so that I wouldn't receive anything for Christmas. Even though I had never touched a drug at that point, his girlfriend hated me, so he did too. She would constantly try to convince me that I was a useless, unintelligent person who didn't belong in the family. The worst part is that I love my grandmother more than anything, but she doesn't believe anything I've told her and still wants me to have a relationship with him. About 9 years ago, he finally admitted to me that he never loved me. I know it's not as extreme as what others have gone through, but it feels kind of good to get it off my chest. There are worse things, but I don't care to get into those. Story 34. I guess this is pretty tame by comparison, but it's a wild story that could honestly make for a decent film, or at least a This American Life segment. My paternal grandfather was a Japanese graduate student in the U.S. in the mid-1950s. He met my grandmother, a recent French immigrant, and they had my dad. Everything seemed fine. By the early 1960s, my grandfather was trying to enter the Japanese Foreign Service. But when the government learned he had married a Western woman, they strongly disapproved. They gave him a choice: accept a prestigious posting that would advance his career if he divorced and abandoned my grandmother, or keep the family and be sent to Saigon, which at the time was a quasi-war zone. Apparently, representing Japan while married to a white woman was considered unacceptable. He chose the career. Years later, about 10 years ago, he reconciled somewhat with my grandmother and dad. We see him occasionally now. He's a fascinating, even fun person once you get past his life choices. But to this day, no one in his extended family in Japan knows about my father, or about any of us who aren't Japanese. It would be considered shameful or something like that. Story 35. When I was 13, I found disturbing images on the family computer. I confronted my father, who denied knowing anything about them. I then went to my mother, but by that time, the images had been deleted and I was punished for lying. I didn't think much of it until a few months later, when my mom found more images. This time, because the content featured people around my age, they assumed I was the one responsible. I was punished again, for both the images and lying about it being someone else. At that point, I realized I needed solid proof before saying anything again. I found my dad's files, now password protected and encrypted. I think that's what eventually led me into a career in computer security. Over the next 6 months, I learned how to break in. I saved what I could, images and chat logs, on floppy disks and kept them in my room. Eventually, I found logs detailing a meeting with a 14-year-old girl. The dates matched up with the time he claimed he'd be away on a business trip. I called Crime Stoppers, a UK service for anonymously reporting crimes. But due to the nature of the crime, they advised me to go directly to the police. As a 14-year-old who'd already been disbelieved twice, I just couldn't face reporting him in person. So I did the only thing I could think of. I brought one of the discs to school and made sure a teacher found it. That set everything in motion. The police raided our house, seized our electronics, and questioned me in front of my parents. My father sat there silently, letting them interrogate me, and didn't say a word. Eventually, he confessed. My mom forced him to turn himself in. He was sentenced to 6 months, only convicted on 3 images I had saved, with a guilty plea and a promise to undergo psychiatric help. My mother never left him. She said she married for better or worse, and meant it. She never explicitly said it, but I could tell she blamed me for breaking up the family during those 6 months. He never really apologized for letting me take the fall. All I got was a half-hearted, "I'm sorry, I was sick." They're still together. I moved out as soon as I could and barely spoke to my dad for years. Today, they just act like none of it ever happened. Story 36. My uncle's girlfriend once claimed that she had been kidnapped and assaulted in a van for several days by 5 men. There was an extensive FBI investigation, and our entire family was deeply worried. She said the men had assaulted her, and she became pregnant as a result. As the investigation continued, there were questions about whether the story was true. It made the news and became a big deal. At first, we all believed her. After all, no one would lie about something like that, or so we thought. But she and my uncle had fabricated the entire story. The FBI uncovered the truth. She had actually stayed at a friend's house during the time she claimed she was missing. The whole thing was to cover up the fact that my uncle had gotten her pregnant. She gave birth to the baby. Things calmed down, and they were planning to get married. I even met my cousin as a baby. I don't remember it, but there's a photo. Not long after that, she left. She took the child, moved to Salt Lake City, became a very religious pastor, and eventually married another pastor. Her daughter doesn't know we exist. She believes her stepfather is her biological dad. As for my parents, they both had multiple affairs throughout their 21-year marriage. At one point, my mom was planning to run away with a man named Eduardo and leave us behind. My dad found out and recorded one of their phone calls. He made her listen to it. That's when he began his own affair. He ended up getting involved with the sister of my mom's sister's husband. Yes, really. That relationship went on for quite a while. Meanwhile, my mom ended things with Eduardo but continued seeing other men. I only found out about all of this a few months ago. My brother had discovered my mom's large diary years earlier, documenting everything in detail. He kept it to himself until recently. Apparently, he had known for 5 years. As kids, we never had any idea. Somehow, they managed to raise us in a stable environment and kept everything hidden. I still don't know how they pulled that off. Story 37. Well, mine aren't that shocking compared to others, but still, when my great-grandparents began showing signs of dementia years ago, my great-uncle, their son, started to borrow money from them. At first, it was just a few hundred here and there. Then it became thousands. He spent it on mistresses and escorts. They trusted him with everything because he was the oldest, but clearly they shouldn't have. By the time both of them passed away, the money was completely gone, and so was he. We suspect he's either passed away or living somewhere in Spain. The FBI was supposedly after him too, though no one ever told me why. When his sister, my Nana, passed away, things got even worse. My 2 uncles cheated my mother out of everything she had been left in the will. Furniture, money, my Nana's engagement ring, everything. My Nana had also written something special into the will for my 16-year-old autistic brother, but that was stolen too. My mom hired a lawyer and tried to take legal action, but the lawyer who had written the will had passed away. My uncle signed a sworn statement saying there was no will, and that was that. Sibling rivalry is toxic in our family. I haven't spoken to anyone from that side of the family since, not after what they did.